Hello, everybody. I know everybody's just kind of getting settled and joining, so I'll give everybody a minute to join here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So everybody, settle on in, and we'll give us a minute or two to go ahead and get started. Okay, thank you. Just while everyone is getting settled, we're waiting on one of our panelists to join us here. Have to love technology. Technology is only as good as when it works. But one while everybody's getting settled, um, this webinar is going to be recorded. So if there is anything that you've missed, or you want to review back, you will be getting a recording after its completion, as well as there's an area for Q&A. At the end of our discussion, we will be going over some of the points that we can cover for you guys as we go through today's webinar. So you can enter any of your questions in the Q&A. If we can answer them live, we certainly will do that. If not, we'll be very happy to follow up with you via email or to arrange a subsequent call in terms of getting any of those questions answered for you guys. Okay. I'm being told that there is an echo while I am speaking. Is anybody else hearing an echo? Could be something on your end. If you have your microphone turned on for any reason, it might be echoing on your end. Thank you, Florence. So make sure that if you do have a microphone on your computer, that it is muted. And if it's echoing, then it could be something on your end. I do apologize for that. Maybe if you turn the volume down a little bit, especially if you're on a laptop, the your microphone is pretty close to where your speakers are, so it might be giving you a little feedback there. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Heather. Very good. We'll get started here in just a moment, folks. Thank you. There he is. Hi, George.
Sorry, guys, I'm just having some technical difficulties at my end.
That's okay. We thought you stood us up. Honestly, I was starting to feel a little heartbroken.
Not at all. Good looking fella like you. Never.
Thanks, George. I appreciate it. So we'll go ahead and kick things off here. If there's any audio or technical issues as we go through, again, we apologize. We're doing our best to keep everything up and running as smooth as we can. So if there's anything that you note during the broadcast, please feel free to chat to us. Also, again, that Q&A box is there for you to enter questions into. And what we'll go ahead and do is we'll address those if it's appropriate. We might address it in the moment, but mostly we'll be addressing them towards the end of the webinar. I'll go ahead and kick things off. So please, thank you everyone and welcome. To Plotbox's presentation of the importance of digital mapping. I am David Merwine. I will be leading today's discussion. I myself am a senior solutions consultant here at Plotbox, and I have over 10 years of experience working as a funeral director and cemeterian. As you could probably tell by my accent, in America, on the West Coast of the United States, where I've grown up and lived my life. And joining me today, I have two very knowledgeable gentlemen. The first, George Simpson. George, if you'd like to say hello and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. Apologies for my delay getting online. Yeah, look, my experience is predominantly in the funeral and cemetery sector, both in the UK and in Australia, where I've worked for some of the largest funeral and cemetery providers. I now operate my own boutique consultancy business, working with, you know, businesses right across the funeral sector, including funeral directors, cemeteries, crematoria, and a whole host of suppliers, including Plotbox. So I'm looking forward today to just having a chat around, why it's important to have digital mapping in the cemetery, particularly for the future. I think the cemetery industry has gone through a bit of a revamp over the last 5 or 6 years with this type of technology, and I'm sure that some of the items that we talk about will be of much interest to the audience. So I'm looking forward to this morning's webinar.
Great. Thanks for being here, George. And then also joining me is one of my colleagues, one of my favorite colleagues. Don't tell anyone that, Brendy, but Brendan
That's
McCann. He's our head of mapping. Brendan, go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself.
Hi guys, my name's Brendan McCann. I have 10 years site engineering experience, and then I have a 10 years experience working for Plotbox. Pretty much developing the process for how we do mapping along with my colleagues. We started off doing traditional topographical surveys, and then drawing up the drawings for the cemeteries in CAD. And over this 10 years period, we've developed that into using the drones and creating drone imagery, and then incorporating that into GIS software. So we've sort of developed a whole technique or process that's enabled us to survey cemeteries about 8 times quicker now than what we initially started off doing 10 years ago. So it's been a great journey, to be honest, and hopefully it continues for a while. So yeah.
Great. Well, Brendan, thank you very much for that introduction. So Brendan, George, again, thank you guys for joining us today. Again, the topic of today's discussion is the importance of digital mapping. So everything in today's world is moving into a digital or more technologically advanced methods of use and things like that. So cemetery maps are something that's coming right along with us. Digital mapping essentially is an accurate visualization of your inventory on a device. So whether that's your tablet, your phone, your laptop, your desktop, wherever you might be accessing the information from, it's taking not just the mapping as a visual representation, but also the data that lives in your system, and it's integrating those two things. And that's something that Plotbox has pioneered, because in previous systems and previous softwares, oftentimes even if you had mapping or you had data retention and data management, they didn't quite go together as well as you might like them to. So when you invest in a truly digital mapping solution like Plotbox, what you end up getting is you're reducing the likelihood of errors, you're reducing time, money, and potentially even protecting yourself against a lawsuit. So today's agenda, these are going to be our talking points. We're going to do our best to talk through all of them. We may get on a tangent, we may get on a question that takes us a little bit off course, but we're going to try and stay within the framework of this to really make sure that everybody benefits from our discussion today. So these are some of the key points that we'll be talking through. The first one being, why is digital mapping so important? So there we'll all kind of touch on and highlight the importance of digital mapping. Next in line, we'll talk about signs that you should update your cemetery map. So there's going to be some key factors that you want to go ahead and look for that are going to, you can even do like an internal audit and say, oh man, I checked 3 of those 5 boxes. Maybe it is time that I consider updating my cemetery maps. We'll talk a little bit about Plotbox, how our full software and mapping integration works as far as making it beneficial to you. And then again, diving a little bit deeper into the actual benefits of investing in that digital mapping. And then finally, we're going to wrap things up with some customer success stories and some Q&A. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to jump right in, get our feet wet, and we're going to start with why digital mapping is so important. So there are 3 essential reasons why digital cemetery maps are extremely important. I'll touch on the first one here, which is protecting your cemetery and crematory records. So you've got fires, floods, other types of natural disasters. Record protection is absolutely vital in preserving the history of the cemetery. As cemeterians, it's our job to be stewards of these lovely places for generations to come. And a big piece of that is making sure that the data and information that we keep is intact for those future generations. So cemeteries all over the world, again, their job is to protect historical records. It's to ensure that the history of the cemetery is preserved. And no matter what the crisis may be, if you have your data stored in a cloud environment such as Plotbox, it ensures that it's backed up and protected and secure in a safe location. A lot of times, we hear the word cloud, and it's kind of a buzzword nowadays. And what ends up happening is, oh, it's just another one of those terms, and it's something that people tend to be scared of. But cloud computing really is the most secure, the most safe way to keep and manage your records. So ensuring and entrusting your data to a cloud-based system really is the best thing that you can do, the best investment you can make as far as protecting your records. And being able to access your data essentially allows you to conduct your business as usual in the event of something happening. It minimizes the loss of productivity, especially when your records are essentially the key to unlocking opportunities within the billion-dollar industry that is genealogy. When you're storing, again, records and even your maps on the cloud, you eliminate the risk as these files can be accessed from any mobile device at any time with a secure login. So again, protecting those cemetery records is very important. Point number one. And George, I think you're going to speak to the next couple of points here. Go right ahead, please.
Yeah, look, I think you've identified some of the challenges that operators have in terms of keeping historical records. One other item I would add to that, David, is the books that cemeteries have, the ledgers that they have are 150 or 100 years old, and some of these are very, very fragile. And when you lift them in and out of a safe room, or use them, or go through them, or put entries into them, or do searches, every time you do that, you're running the risk that you're damaging those historical records as well. So some of the challenges that I've seen in particular about why digital mapping is so important. I've had a couple of occasions over the years where stories of families visiting the wrong grave for many, many years. They may not have been able to afford a headstone or a marker. And one particular occasion, we done a burial where a family had been visiting a grave for over 20 years. And they argued with us that this was the wrong grave. We actually had to retrieve the nameplate of the previous interment over 20 years before, so that they could actually understand that this was the right grave. Now, that family had been visiting that grave and putting some flowers down there and some anniversaries for many, many years. So you can understand just how the grief they felt over that occasion. Cemetery operators are absolutely, as you identified, custodians of many, many community pieces of history. And they have many users accessing the information. Those cemeteries who have a digital platform that customers and clients can access, they're really being used to a very high level. I think having digital maps stored elsewhere and digital information reduces the risk to your organisation and increases the governance that your organisation is showing in terms of security. One other thing that I want to add to that is that every cemetery that I'm aware of has a super groundsman or a super employee who knows where everything is. He knows the idiosyncrasies of the cemetery. One row may start at one end but finish in a different number. The risk around losing these people, whether they retire or move on, is really great, because I'm not aware of that knowledge getting passed on to a great number of people. So there's some things that I think that cemeteries need to be aware of, and in terms of putting digital mapping and digital records into the cemetery.
Absolutely. And I think from a standpoint of that institutional knowledge that you talk to, right? ensuring that that information is in somebody's mind, but being able to have it displayed again for yourself and for future generations to be able to access that and make sure that that information is accurate and correct, right? To make sure that you're not facing things like lawsuits. It's not uncommon, like you're saying, to hear stories like the ones that you've told, where family members are in fact, visiting a wrong grave for any number of years. And in fact, it happened to me. I remember very clearly at the cemetery I was working at, where a family, very same situation. We went to do a burial, and an inscription on a headstone, and they're said, well, wait a minute, this isn't where we've been visiting. This isn't where we've been delivering flowers. So the accuracy of your information and record keeping, and then combining that, even in with your increase of pre-need sales, being able to reference these records and be able to offer things to families that we weren't able to offer them before, because we don't have a clear path to the future. We don't have a way to clearly take all that information that we've collated over all these years, and bring that forward into today, and then even looking even more into the future there. Do you have any comment, George, on pre-need sales and how information and mapping can affect those types of things?
Look, I think the events of the last year have absolutely pushed digital pre-need sales to the fore. Where people haven't been able to generally visit a cemetery and see a plot in real time, there's opportunities for them now to search online for those cemeteries who are using a mapping software, and actually see down to a relatively detailed level that the grave that they actually want to pick. Will it revolutionise pre-sales? I don't know. I guess what I think is going to revolutionise pre-need sales is affordability. If families want to buy a $15,000 or $20,000 product, and we're seeing a lot of that, particularly in the capital cities, then they're going to have to be able to pay that over a period of time. So I would urge those families, if they wanted to do that, to look at some pre-need opportunities now. There's also opportunities, I guess, where the populations of big cities are moving out, and maybe moving to rural areas or out further out from the city. And using this sort of technology as an opportunity to arrange burials without actually visiting the site before the funeral. I'll give you an example. Many of the communities in Sydney moved to the Central Coast or the North Coast for retirement purposes. And if they wanted to have a burial, say, in Macquarie Park or French's Forest or Rookwood, for example, they would generally need to visit the cemetery if they wanted to see where the grave was going to be located. They don't really need to do that now. They can use the mapping software on Plotbox or other providers. So it's certainly more accessible for purchasing a grave site. But not only that, it just creates tremendous organisational efficiencies. When I was at Rookwood, it wouldn't be uncommon to have 50 or 60 inquiries, physical inquiries into their office. And at times it was overwhelming, particularly on the weekends. So the more that people can actually interact with the software and get the information they need before going to the cemetery, or even while they're at the cemetery, then that's certainly going to provide organisations with an efficient outlook.
Yeah, absolutely. And Florence, one of the attendees, has just shared with us a story of where a few years ago she came across a small regional cemetery where the gravedigger also happened to be the record keeper, and that person had trouble reading and writing and being able to keep up the records, and it generated some unfortunate stories and situations, because that one person again had all that knowledge, and there was no way to translate that for future generations to keep that. So Florence, thank you for sharing that. That really is another powerful example there. So
David, I couldn't jump in on the last the 3 points you were just talking about there.
Yeah, go right ahead, please.
I have a couple of examples there.
Sure.
So just for protecting the the records, we had a council in England there. They had lost all their maps and their records through flooding.
Wow.
So that was 2 out of 17 facilities, you know, that didn't have any records left for after that incident. Because of this, we actually the only option was to do mapping, you know, and that was the first port of call. So we had to survey the cemeteries, transcribe the headstones, and then import what we could see on the headstones, you know, into the system, and that was all the records they ended up with then.
Wow.
Whereas, you know, if they had implemented a digital solution previous, there would have been more records available in the system, you know, coming from the paper records.
Right.
And all the data would have been tied in together, you know, along with the mapping info. The records and deeds and plots for, you know, would have been digitized, and then they could have scanned their paper records, and that would have all tied in together along with the headstone imagery, you know, to give them, you know, the confidence that all that info was accurate, like, you know. So yeah, there's just a good example of it can happen, you know.
Yeah.
So,
That's absolutely. I mean, and thinking of it, just to comment on that from you, Brent, like reading a headstone, if the headstone is old and it's not been resurfaced or anything's been done to it to upkeep it over time, that's going to become, you know, if that's your only source of record keeping.
yes, I'm saying, that's all. That's the only information you're getting out there, you know.
Yeah.
Just on the accuracy there, I had an example locally here, just in Northern Ireland, where there was one cemetery where they actually had a few burials. I think it was we found 2 out of about, I think it was a 20-acre cemetery where somebody had been listed in a particular plot within the registers, but then when you were physically out on the ground, the interment was in the neighbouring plot, you know, and it became that only became really obvious because when you created the map and linked the points physically, and then when we took that information and went out on site and started taking the headstone photographs, you know, as soon as you come across to that point and you take the photograph, you're like, well, that name doesn't match up with the name and the digital information, you know. It becomes very clear very quickly there's a problem, and we raised that with the council, and you know, they were fit to go away and get ahead of the problem, you know, and inform the families what the situation was and stuff. So I'm sure you're better to be ahead of the situation than finding out, you know, at a later date when maybe that particular plot sold or something, you know. Just on the pre-need sales there, it's maybe not increasing the pre-need sales per se, but we just finished work on a 300 odd acre cemetery in the States, and when I say finish the work, they've had the entire cemetery mapped, and it's interactive. So because that's the case, and we're a cloud-based solution, they've been fit to go out with iPads out into the cemetery, and they've been able to access the digital information live as they're standing out on the site. And I had some great feedback there last week that said it's literally decreased exponentially the amount of time it's taken them. Even this is very simple, like, it's just to find the plots that for the clients that have been walking in, you know, because they haven't had to go in and start rifling through cabinets there and then, you know, in the office, trying to find the right maps and so on. They've just been able to do it on the fly while out on site, you know. Like, this is quite a big cemetery, so it works really well for them, but I'm sure the same applies to the smaller, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Brendan, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for that. George, do you have any additional comment before we moved on to the next point?
Yeah. I guess ultimately, you know, accuracy and images lead to a client experience that has been increased from what they were used to before, you know. And just going back to the point Florence made, that's not uncommon for local cemeteries, particularly church-based organisations where there's a lot of volunteers involved. and some of the records are actually kept on a small booklet or a school jotter. But one of the other things that we found during the data migration process at Rookwood was the amount of spelling errors, particularly around the late 1800s, early 1900s, where the many people who came in to buy a grave or to have a burial were not literate, and they gave a phonetic spelling of their name. So there's been many occasions since Rookwood went live where families have actually done the search and they've spotted a mistake in spelling or something, and they've actually raised it with the cemetery. So they were able to go into the system and update that for the first time, sometimes in over 100 years. So there's a fantastic benefit to accurate records moving forward.
Just on that as well, it doesn't just happen for the interment records and deed records. It actually happens for plot referencing, which you think would be the most stable sort of bit of information that you could have, within the system. Like, if you're using multiple different systems to create your info, the plot reference can be called something different, and you'd say 3 different repositories for your data there. And we find that quite a lot when we go to combine the GIS information with the digital databases. The plot references,
right,
very rarely, they can match up, but there's a lot of instances where they don't. And then there's a lot of work spent trying to create uniformity within the system throughout the entire cemetery. And then it actually throws up. You can get quite a lot of. At the end of the process, whenever we might have finished mapping, you actually find out you can have a whole list of irregularly named plots. And that actually happened with yourself, George, in Rookwood there. And there was a good few plots, complete references that just needed to be taken out of the system, and then burial information moved into the correctly named plot. So there wasn't actually the amount of plot inventory within the system, and in that case, than there should have been. But that isn't just the case there in Rookwood. That's every cemetery we've done has had this same issue, So
yeah,
right,
yeah, it can just vary on depending on the size.
It was no mean feat there, Brendan, with almost 3 million records. So there was always going to be something that was going to be challenging,
Yeah,
absolutely. And it sounds like we're getting into a little bit, we're kind of leaking into the, some signs that you should upgrade your cemetery map. So, things that we, think about, we're talking about human error, preservation issues. So if your current mapping is just on paper, you could see yourself, like we've talked about, with the possibility of losing those records at some time. We talked a little bit through, natural disasters and things of that nature, and even human error. Like we're talking about misspellings and accuracies. If you're even depending on someone to say, for example, we used to do this at Holy Cross before we implemented Plotbox. After we would meet with a family, it was up to us to go mark the sales map. We'd have to go physically mark a map and, list the date and, who it was sold to and all these things. And so what ends up happening is, although humans, especially cemeterians, we try and be very careful with our record keeping. We're all prone to human error. We're only human. We're all going to get distracted at some point in time. We're instead of relying on a software to kind of manage that for us and manage those grave statuses and things of that nature, which you can do in a digital mapping environment. You can rely on, okay, there's a burial booked for this grave. The status automatically updates of that grave from being empty to partial, right? And then when you book the last remaining right in that grave, the status then automatically moves from partial to full. You don't have to rely on human error, human process to make that happen. So, if you are currently seeing issues with accuracy, with human error, again, with issues of just thinking, kind of like what George alluded to with, that institutional knowledge, if you're afraid that that person's going to retire or pass on, and then what are you left with? That's definitely a sign that you should potentially, move into. And I know something that Brendan focuses on and is part of our soul and core, methodology here is, how geographically accurate are your maps? Brendan, that's something that we see a lot when we're working with cemeteries. Do you care to talk about, some of that?
Yeah, could do. Yeah. You know, when we receive a lot of map info from various clients, a lot of the time, you know, they'll have used arbitrary referencing systems just to map out their cemetery. What we're trying to do is get an accurate geographical location or system on the go. Really benefits then, you know, from just accuracy within the map, and in the long run, then for even walk to grave facilities for the public.
Right.
When you've got a true geographical location, you know, a proper Latin long for the positions of the plots, then you can look up we have a sister website, Discover Ever After, and you can look up a particular interment name then, and it'll walk you straight to the particular plot that you're looking for, and that's live to the public. So it just doesn't benefit the cemetery managers in particular, you know. Yeah, that's what we do.
Absolutely. So I mean, from that standpoint, you know, that you mentioned the longitude and latitude, the true accuracy, and you touched on something I know George is very keen on and very passionate about. It's that how shareable is your information, right? So if you have information that can be shared with the public, you know, that's something I know, George, that really rings really true with you. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, look, I think it's pure gold to the public to allow them to get some access to not only navigate their way around cemeteries without being inefficient, but to keep them safe as well. You know, the last thing you want is families or researchers trekking through some parts of the cemetery that may not have been maintained for decades. Again, that leads to the risk of the organisation, whether it be you know, wildlife or you know, unsecured monuments. So the last thing you want is people to trek through areas of your cemetery that may be unsafe. But I think going back to the previous point, you made the point about inaccuracies and human error, and I would suggest that it would be quite a high occasion when double sales of a plot are actually made. If you've got multiple salespeople using the same maps and selling at the same time, then it's an absolute risk that your salespeople may sell the same plot twice. You know, and I've
Yeah.
had that occasion probably more than a handful of times in the last few years. So it's
Yeah.
definitely a real risk. Generally families will be understanding, but you know, what do you do if you have two
Right.
families who are saying, I'm not going to change?
I mean,
That's
what
a massive issue.
absolutely. And like honestly, you know, to your exact point, when I first started at Holy Cross and I was a counselor and I was meeting with families and I'd be in a section and I'd see one of my colleagues in the section also, I'd like run over to them and, you know, hey, you know, what are you showing them, just to make sure that we're trying to avoid that. But you don't always have that luxury. You don't always have that opportunity to do that. So you're absolutely right. You know, having a digital map allows you to have a live update. I can put that plot on hold right there out in the field with an iPad, right? So it definitely that gave me some flashbacks of, you know, walking fast. I'll say, I won't say running through the cemetery, walking quickly through the cemetery to talk to a colleague about that. So that's great. Jess has just written in with a point, and Jess, this is very well taken. I'll just read some of this. You know, Jess has noted that they have a number of issues, so it's definitely a conversation that they want to take offline. You know, firstly, over time, something that you alluded to, Brendan, was the notation. Like the numbering system has changed. Maybe a new section has opened, and we've decided to name that a different way. So with the older numbering system, Jess is having trouble finding a map that corresponds to the new numbering system,
Yeah.
and also having a large number of unidentified and unmarked graves. You know, in locations where these are they're mapped in CAD with their other plots, and they've had to do two passes of GPR in specific locations. I'm not sure what GPR is. Brendan, do you know what those initials stand
Yeah,
for?
it's ground penetrating radar. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very good. So
we would have collaborated with a professor from a local university here to do a few GPR surveys around Ireland and the UK here, you know. So yeah.
Awesome. And again, that's something that's additional effort, right? And currently it sounds like just their process, what they have to do, and this is time consuming. This is extra work. They have to actually look at two plots for burial. They have to have like a first and second, from how I'm understanding this, Jess. Please correct me if I'm wrong. They have to have a first and second choice, because there's been times where they go to do a burial and that grave is actually occupied. So, Jess, definitely feel for you. If there's anything we can do to help, or any further discussion that you need, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you for that. I'm glad we were able to touch on that and answer that for you.
Yeah,
Um,
the GPR can be really accurate in some sort of in certain soil conditions, you know. But in general, if you've done a GPR survey, you're still recommending to dig tentatively. You know, and that's just exactly what you're saying there, you know. So, because things can still be missed.
Absolutely.
Look, if I can just sort of climb into that one as well. My experience of GPR used in cemeteries has not been very successful. You know, I think it's a bit hit and miss.
Yeah,
I think the point
yeah.
James makes here that they've actually not identified any remains, but when they pegged the grave and dug the grave, they've actually found remains. You know, and that's a real challenge for cemetery operators, because what do you do when you find those remains? You've got no records that identify them. You know, you've got to talk to coroners and all sorts of stuff. And look, I'm happy if Jess wants to reach out to me and have a general chat about some of the issues, and maybe I can sort of help her a little bit. So feel free, Jess, to reach out.
Absolutely, George. Thanks for that, Brendan. Thanks for talking us through that as well with the GPR there. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh, ground pen. I just, it was lost on me for the moment, but I thanks for the assist there. I appreciate that. In talking through again some of these signs, just to kind of to just review real quick before we move on here. Preservation issues, human error, inaccuracies. How geographically accurate are your maps, and is your information shareable and accessible outside of the office, even when your counselors are out on the ground selling graves? So these are all important things to kind of take a look at when you're essentially auditing yourself. And if you need any help with any of that, like George offered, Brendan, myself, any of us here really are very happy to help and have a conversation with you around that. So and just talking a little bit about Plotbox itself, and how we have the actual mapping and software integration. Plotbox, for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, we are a cloud-based cemetery management solution, which means that you can access Plotbox anywhere you have an internet connection and a web browser. So your desktop, your laptop, your mobile device, your tablet, no matter where you have need for that access, you can have a secure login to that. You can essentially pull everything together, from a mapping standpoint. Yes, your records, Brendan talked about your ownership records, not just deceased burial records, but all types of records, financial, contract, any of those things can all kind of pull together in one place. We often like to call Plotbox a single source of truth. It's somewhere that you go to get the information that you need and be able to store it for those future generations. Problems that have traditionally been very difficult to solve are now possible with ease as you utilize leading administrative software and geo-rectified mapping, which again brings together two things that were not and have not previously been integrated before. I know from my previous experience, we had an interment register system, we had a contract and ownership register system, and then we had paper maps and some of those ledger books that George was talking about that we'd spend sometimes thousands of dollars a year to have rebound to preserve them. All of these things, you kind of had almost felt like a detective at times. I felt like I was one of the detective's bests when you're kind of piecing all these things together. And that's something that, Brendan, I know you hear a lot. You hear that a lot from some of our customers. So being able to have a fully integrated solution really just brings to the forefront an opportunity to have all your records in one place. And it's very important. We've talked about a little bit about the importance of digital mapping, but now we want to kind of talk a little bit more into why bringing it all together is important. It just means that essentially with we have an ability to solve a tremendous amount more of issues And it essentially ends up putting Plotbox in a different space than a lot of other providers. You can think of it almost as a more advanced software solution than really anything that's out there. If you take that, fuse that with 1 inch accuracy, which we can provide with a validated and verified mapping solution, which Brennan, I know that's something that whether we're coming on site or we're training you guys how to do that, it's something that's very important to do as a final audit step when you're doing the digital mapping. We take that high resolution imagery, combine it with that verified process to give you that digital map in real time, reducing that risk, validating new inventory for sale. And there really are a lot of options. And George, I'm going to let you speak to this a little bit here because I know this is something that, again, is on your mind, and a point that you wanted to make sure we talked about was affordability and pricing structure and things like that. So while George talks to that, I'm going to ask the whole question of how your cemetery mapping is currently connected. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, and George, the floor is yours, sir.
Oh, thanks, David. Look, it'll come as no surprise that I'm very passionate about affordability of not only funerals but cemetery spaces, and those people who are participating this morning might have heard me speak before about affordability and funeral poverty. The reality in Australia is that in some capital cities, in some areas, cemetery plots are unaffordable for families, particularly at need. If you consider an Orthodox family who have to buy a grave, have to buy a monument, have to have an after-funeral function, and everything else that goes with that funeral, they get no change at $50,000. A family that I spoke to that happened to said it was a blessing that dad didn't pass away soon after mum, because they would have been really struggling. And funeral poverty is something that's very prevalent over in the UK at the moment, where they've identified that funerals not only put some people in poverty, but actually keep people in poverty. The high cost of funerals is just becoming unavailable for those families who are of limited means. One example recently is that the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal in New South Wales carried out a review of the funeral of the cemetery and crematoria sector in New South Wales, and they've recently published their report late last year and have identified that the operators need to be more accommodating for families of the lower end of the spectrum, the more affordable products. When you think the starting prices for products in some cemeteries in Sydney is, upwards almost $10,000. Now, local authorities certainly don't charge that much, but it's still a big investment for families. But I think, getting back to why it's important to have the software and mapping integrated into your cemetery. If you think about the issue that's overtaking the cemetery sector in New South Wales, which is the fact that everybody's running out of land, not only the Crown operators, but some local authority operators as well. If you had a visual tool that allowed you to not only see what you had available, you could actually plan ahead to forecast when you're going to run out of space, so that you could plan, years in advance to take that journey down the acquiring a new cemetery site, which in Sydney in particular has proved, if not impossible, certainly challenging for operators. So that's the kind of situation we're in Sydney, and I guess that the more that you can plan ahead, if you can plan 10 years ahead of buying a new site and developing it, notwithstanding going through the development application process, then having that information through the mapping and the software that Plotbox offers is fantastic. One of the items I used to have on my dashboard for Plotbox was about the sustainability of Rookwood. When were we actually going to run out? So we could actually have those reports sent to us on a monthly basis to say, you know, last month we had X amount of plots, this month we used X and now we've got Y. So that allowed us to plan and allowed us also to release prepaid graves or stop that release. You know, some sections in Rookwood you cannot pre-purchase a grave, but other sections you can. So there's some of the benefits that I felt using the Plotbox software and the mapping integration.
That's really great. Thank you, George, for touching on that. I'm gonna just share the results of the poll here real quick. So 30% of those who voted have yes, that your mapping is connected to your records management system. Kudos to you. That's something that we don't see very often. So that's fantastic that you guys have something in place for you. As far as them being stored in a GIS system separately, 20% to 20% of you answered in that regard, and then 50% that answered the poll said not at all. So what we see here is we see again some more than we usually do have something connected to their mapping, but some not at all. So those of you that not at all, you know, it is a value proposition that's to some extent, as George kind of talked through there, you know, for affordability and things like that. And when it comes to the actual mapping itself, and this is a question's just come through that we'll touch here on the benefits. And Brennan, I'll let you kind of talk to this. You know, someone is Sharon has asked, you know, some vendors are using satellite maps, which are like Google Maps essentially. You know, is that the same of what we're showing today? So Brennan, I don't know if you want to talk to that a little bit before we move on to the last slide here.
No, it's not the drone imagery. We're not far off actually being able to, and you can't at the minute, but we're not far off. You can nearly read if there's a flat memorial with an inscription on it. The drone imagery, you can nearly read the inscriptions on the flat markers. The pixelation of the photographs is only like 8 millimeters per pixel, but on the satellite imagery, you're talking about 150 millimeters. So the image quality on the drone work is far superior to satellite imagery that you would get from a normal library out of Esri or even the Google Maps, you know.
Right. And one of the things I'll say to that, I'll add on to that a little bit as far as not just image quality, but image content. You don't have control over those satellite images. You don't know what is showing in those images. They're actually, in fact, at the cemetery I used to work at, if you Google them right now and you look in a certain section, you can actually see a funeral, an open grave, the equipment, the family stand. And that is something that if you're using a vendor or a provider that uses satellite imagery, that's what you're at risk to sharing with your families who are looking to maybe visit a grave, either that grave or a grave nearby. That's not what we want to be showing with families. So with Plotbox, it's a drone, it's a static image that, Brendan, correct me if I'm wrong, can be refreshed as, you know, yearly, biannually, however often you'd like to do that.
Yeah, we've a number of clients that they have signed up for that and they get that done, you know. So let's see. So satellite imagery as well, the accuracy of it wouldn't geographically it wouldn't be as accurate as what we're doing. Whenever we go to do a survey, say even away from Ireland here, we'd be hiring local equipment from a hire center, GPS equipment. So all the work's done to a local projected coordinate system. And that's where we'll talk about the 1-inch accuracy, the ground control points that we do put down before we fly the drone are picked up. Generally, we'd stick to Trimble GPS equipment, and it would be the 1-inch accurate GPS equipment that we'll be using. It's not the decimeter or higher. So we tend to use the RTK systems as well. Yeah, so just paying for VRS licenses in the local areas and stuff like that. Yeah, it's going to pick up on a point you made there, Dave, but it slipped me.
That's all right, no worries. If it comes back to you, let us know. George, did you have a point there to add?
Oh no, look, I think I made the point earlier on. You know, the not only does it look great, it's super usable as well. So the information that not only families can get, but even you guys, rather than searching through ledger books, just drill down to a site, click on the bubble, and you get everything at your fingertips with the family sitting in front of you. You can actually verify with the family: is this your relative that's in this grave? Are these the correct details? Do you want me to edit them? Do you want me to update them? So they're the opportunities you've got. I mean, even on site, even meeting a family on site if you have a tablet, that was something that we done at Rookwood. We had about 50 acres mapped by the plot box team that included monuments as well. So that's another check, I guess, that you're at the right spot.
Absolutely. And that's great. And that's leading us into, you guys are professional segue guys today. Both of you have done, I owe you both some PayPal or Venmo or something. I'll send you guys the $20 I owe you. But from a standpoint of, those benefits that we're starting to talk about now, I'm just going to kind of let you guys talk through some of these points here. It's something that you guys both very, very passionate about, especially from the perspective in which you both sit. And then once we've talked through these, and feel free guys to pepper in some customer success stories as well. George, I know yours with Rookwood, and then Brennan with some of the others that you guys have spoken through. So please feel free guys to kind of take away some of these. If George, if you'd like to start, feel free.
Sure. Look, I think that this is a journey that most operators are looking at, and some of the clients I've spoken to, particularly in local council authorities, are very interested in it. They are sometimes being managed only by a person in an office where everything else is subcontracted out. So I think whilst you subcontract services for cemeteries, the risk gets greater every time you subcontract it. The efficiencies that you're able to gain through having a significant software package are just fantastic. But also the reduced risk to the organisation. So you're de-risking your processes and procedures. Is it all about selling more and selling faster? I'm not 100% convinced of that. It's all about, for me, but being in the experience economy, making sure that people who have to buy these goods and services, they don't generally want to have to buy them. They'd rather buy a holiday or a car.
True.
So the best experience that we can give them through innovative technology and innovative practices, I think is really, really important. And I guess at the last point, is sharing your data with the public. Instead of having to visit the cemetery and then trek around, you're able to get access sitting in your own lounge room through the Ever After site. And a couple of really successful stories I'll share with you if I can. The first one was in day 2 of going live with Plotbox at Rookwood, where I had to go out the front of the office, and there was a chap standing there, and I got talking to him, and he told me the story. He was waiting for some of his other relatives to come because they'd found this grave of a lady by the name of Lucy Farrow. They didn't know where she was. They'd been researching her for many, many months. And I was able to, on my smart device, show him how that we can now navigate to the gravesite. So he was able to get there to within 4 centimeters. Now, that's a great story in itself, but I guess the sort of added benefit to this is that the lady who was in the grave, Lucy Farrow, was actually the grandmother of the actress Mia Farrow. So
wow.
it just gives you a bit of a link,
Right.
And then on the following weekend, day 2 or 3 of going live, we had a visitor at the cemetery looking for information around the family grave. And this chap actually was the ABC producer for the breakfast show. And he invited us on to talk about this fantastic new software that he had just become aware of on the weekend. So he was happy to tell everybody, and I went on and spoke to Robbie and Wendy and had a good chat about the Google Maps cemeteries, as they call them. So there's a couple of really good success stories.
Nice. That's lovely to hear. Brendan, do you have anything to share or to add to that?
Yeah, just for success stories. We had a client there in the US, in California, and they got us to do an entire mapping project from start to finish. And before we started doing that project for them, they only had I think it was about 20% of their plot inventory actually in a database, and everything else was stored on paper records that had been scanned. So once we kicked off the project, then they started a remediation project where they're entering all the paper data into digital records, and they've updated their original system now, and it's being migrated into Plotbox. But one thing that jumped out at us as soon as we had completed the mapping and transferred the initial data across, they had a lot of plots on hold within their original system and on their paper records. And these plots have been put on hold back in the 50s and 60s, and they've been put on hold to specifically for it was a few different reasons, but mainly it was for areas that they could do planting in and vegetation, plant a tree and whatnot. Right. But over time, it had turned out that they hadn't ended up using 750 or so of the, or no, sorry, it was actually more like 1,000 of the points they didn't end up using. This was a massive cemetery, by the way, so they didn't end up using those spaces for landscaping, sorry. So that became really apparent really quick, because as soon as you hit the on hold button, it pops up, ROE markers are orange. But when you clicked on the orange spot, then it said it was held for landscaping. When you zoomed in on the aerial image, you could see there was no landscaping done there.
Right.
So yeah, we were able to identify then, I think it was about 1,000 points, but they ended up putting 250 of those back. They said we'll go ahead with landscaping on those areas then, but the other 750 they added back into their inventory, which equates to approximately now about £7.5 million of inventory put back into their their system. So that was fantastic, and they're overjoyed about that one. So that was a real win there. From just getting the full mapping done.
Right.
Let's see. There's a couple other sort of smaller advantages there. We carried out a bit of work just recently. Then we've handed this system over. So I didn't really explain. All our maps are stored within ArcGIS online, and that's where the rest, and they're pulled into the back end of Plotbox then, and that's where they're pulling from to be displayed within the system. But because we're using ArcGIS online, we added different feature layers, on top of the base map, and there's always irregularities, like we were saying, within cemeteries, and we were fit to leave the feature layers as editable, and there's a link within Plotbox that you can click on, and it flicks you out into the editable screen there then, and the client was able to jump on and start drawing on and going, no, you haven't got that quite right. And adding, they were drawing in the polygons, and then adding the sectional and plot number and the correct ones, and maybe adding a few wee notes into the editable layers and stuff. So over a 6-month period there of just backwards and forwards, we're able to create I don't know if we're 100% there, but they were 100% more happier about the digital information than they held within to do with their mapping and whatnot. So that's a good point actually. So it's not an overnight experience. It's months, if not up to a year maybe, of collaboration backwards and forwards to get to the place that the client and ourselves, the quality of the work that we're producing.
And that amount of time though, so for that amount of time and investment, right, thinking about what you're doing for future, right, you're completely future proofing yourself from that piece of it. So taking the time to make sure that it's right at the outset is really important. Brendan,
Yeah.
George, thank you guys both for today. We are coming up against time here, but I just wanted to thank you guys. I know Brendan, you've got, if anybody wants to chat to Brendan more about any of his stories, I'll give you his email and we'll fire away. And you guys are very welcome. Any of us, like most seriously, we do want to thank you guys for being here today and for participating here with us. Brendan, thank you for all your expertise and all your knowledge. And George, very nice to chat to you and your knowledge and your experience and get that all in here. If you guys have any questions, I know we answered them as we kind of roll through. If there's anything additional, I'll give you guys a few seconds there to pop in any questions, and I'll give these gentlemen 30 seconds each if they want to give a quick wrap. Brendan, we'll start with you if you want to just your final thoughts on on the digital mapping piece.
Yeah, basically it's been in my life there for the last 10 years. So mapping, yeah, I'd recommend everybody to get digital mapping. To be honest, I think it just really improves the working knowledge within the cemetery. Because I think it's the main point that you need to be pulling all your other info into, basically, to create a real homogeneous system, right? Or
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Well, Brendan, thank you, George.
Yeah, look, I think technology is coming at the cemetery sector, at a fast rate of knots, and there is just so many opportunities in the marketplace to introduce a solid software and technological platform into your cemetery and funeral business. So take the opportunity. I know it's a bit of a leap of faith, but people have gone before you. There are some pioneers. And look, if anybody wants to have a chat with me, please feel free to reach out to me either through Plotbox or on my website at woodwine.com.au. So I'd be happy to have a chat in the coming days.
Great. I appreciate that. And we'll make sure to get all of everyone's contact information sent out along with the recording. Florence has asked a question. Brendan, this might be one for you. They usually design their new sections in CAD or Revit. Is there a program or format that makes integration into Plotbox a little bit easier? I know CAD is a format that we see quite often.
Yeah, to be honest, we can't take any type of mapping data, paper, CAD, shape files, or Excels even, which we got quite a few from Rookwood there. But the easiest to integrate info that's coming from ArcGIS, so shape files. But CAD is 100% to use as well, but there's just a wee bit more work to do for us. But right. We can use any of that, really. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming through. Again, Brendan, George, thank you guys for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure. I hope we get to do this again sometime soon. And everybody that joined, thank you for taking time. I know for me, it's the end of my day, but I know everyone in Australia is just beginning theirs. And for Brendan, I think it's very late for you. So again, thank you guys very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody that joined. And again, thank you guys for joining me today. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.